Hey, friends, welcome to Notes to the Edge. This is where we have the conversations we should have been having all along, the ones we want to have, but we're not having. And today we have our special guest here. Every week, we explore things like identity and trauma and perception and high functioning survival. And I do believe today's conversation is one of the most important we will probably have and have certainly had so far. Because somewhere right now, there is somebody carrying weight in silence that they haven't told anyone about. There is somebody wondering, am I ever going to feel like myself again? And there is somebody surviving 1 hour, 1 minute at a time. And then there is also someone who loves them dearly and doesn't know what to do. So today's episode is really important. It's about human suffering. And our special guest has a lot to say about that. He is Harold, the founder and CEO of the World Mental Health Forum. It is an international initiative bringing together thought leaders, clinicians, advocates, policymakers, researchers, and people whose lived experience to rethink how we approach mental health and the mental health system. And as you guys know, I have a lot to say about being locked in the mental health system. His work didn't begin in the boardroom. He has a profound story, and we'll get into his origin story. But his work challenges the assumptions that we've inherited through conditioning, and he asks better questions. And you know we love to do that in here. And beyond simplistic explanations, he becomes deeply curious about what suffering is actually trying to tell us. Harold, it is a true honor to have you here. Welcome in, my friend. How are you today?
I'm fine. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for inviting me on this podcast. All the best from the south of Austria, where it's incredibly hot, as it is probably around the world, too hot. And yes, we are having a conversation that should be part of human society for ages.
Yeah.
But for religious and other reasons, it hasn't been. And this is where the whole problem starts. It's not with the individual. It's not with the individual thinking that maybe this life isn't for me. It's not with the individual not being enough of this or that. Somehow humans have an inborn or an inbuilt mechanism that every time, even to our earliest baby days, every time we're not up to something that everybody else around us seems to be doing just fine, we blame it on ourselves. We think we are at fault. It's our fault because obviously everybody else can do it and we can't. So when grown-up people talk to me like this, I always say, well, but that's not true. It's just because you're the better liars.
Well, I always like to now stick to, is it a statement of fact? And my brain likes that question. So anytime my inner critic likes to get nasty with me, I have to ask it, is that a statement of fact? So, Harold, for those of you who don't know you, I know you've got a lot of people coming in who already do know you. I'd love to begin with your origin story. We typically start out with people's origin stories. So, what led you not only into the work that you're doing today, but to begin the World Mental Health Forum?
I always wanted to be a prolific writer because I was very good at that. And later decided, because I had the opportunity to be a film producer and go into film and television production, until slowly I found that I wasn't going to live my life, but somehow life was going to live through me. It started when my mother died by suicide when I was 20. And she was a wonderful person. She was the center of the family. She was loved by all of her children and her husband. And she had a lot of trauma in her life, in her early childhood, in her life as a teenager, in the aftermath of World War II. I'm not going to get into that, but when she died, I had no problem with her having made that decision at all. Because I totally understood. After all, I had been totally connected to her as a baby for 9 months in the womb. So why wouldn't I understand everything that she was going through and feeling, and sometimes had no words for it? What I was very sorrowful about was the loneliness, the feeling of abandonment, the idea of not belonging and not fitting into this life, and having lived a large portion of her life simply to fulfill her responsibilities to her children. And when she felt that we were all old enough and she was tired enough, it was her time to leave. So it wasn't an overnight decision. It was carefully weighed and prepared for decades. I was 45 when my older sister followed. I was 54 when our only daughter among five brothers followed, basically repeating my mother's life in a transgenerational circle, whom she knew nothing about because the two of them had never met. But she was an emotional copy almost of my mother, which made me very uneasy as early as when she was a year or 2 years old. But at the time, I didn't know that even children can be depressed. I thought she was just grumpy, but it was much more than that. And then 4 years later, my younger brother died by suicide, basically as the latest ripple effect of having lost his mom when he was barely 16. All of what I know today, I didn't know at the time. I was completely overwhelmed, like driving your car against a concrete wall and trying to make sense of what has happened. So at first, when my mother died, I thought this was just going to be a private affair that I had to come to terms with together with my family. But when these repeated suicides happened, I realized at the latest time with Lisa that this keeps knocking on my door. And I cannot continue working on my career when this happens. I guess I'm supposed to do something about it with all the creative talents and all of the network and everything else that I had. So we created our foundation. And then we started really learning a whole lot ourselves about how this is truly not a private affair, but it's a worldwide concern. Once every 40 seconds, someone around the world dies by suicide, plus 20 times more of those who try but do not succeed at that time, which is maybe one attempted suicide every second or every 2 seconds. We cannot go on saying this is not happening. We cannot go on not having this conversation. We cannot go on even not talking about death, let alone death by suicide. We cannot go on pretending that death is not part of life, which it certainly is. It's just that we have no experience with it because we are avoiding it all the time. Mm-hmm. And we cannot go on, this is my most important point, pretending, because that's easy for us, it's easy for society, pretending that there is something seriously wrong with these people, because there isn't. I would say that conservatively, more than half, I think it's much more than that, I would think it's maybe 80 to 20% of people who die by suicide had nothing wrong with their mind or with their mental health. What they did have was acquired mental health imbalance, worries, grief, feeling not up to life, losing your sense of belonging, losing your hope even of ever finding your place in this life, and just deciding that it's about time to leave this existence and find another. So every time you research suicide on the internet, for example, you will always be bombarded with the idea that people had impossible and unbearable pain. I agree to that, but that's not our business. It it helps us, or it allows us to put people into a mold where they do not belong, because not everybody dies because of unbearable pain. Some people die because they have lost their connection and their overall focus about what life is supposed to be all about and why they belong in it.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't approach what you do by statistics alone. I know that. Now, you've named the statistics, and those are the statistics we know, first of all. Those are the reported statistics. So you're probably talking one half a second. Um, Many people do assume that suicidal thoughts, just the thoughts alone, means somebody wants to die, but you've challenged that belief. So, from your own experience, what have you learned in this work that those thoughts are actually trying to communicate? The one who isn't looking for death so much as relief, what do you want them to hear? So it's two questions. What are those thoughts helping us communicate? And what words do you have for people who may be suffering in those thoughts right now?
There are people in our circle of connections that are much smarter than I am, and who are doctors or academics for all of their life. They say, to which I agree, that there's probably no single person anywhere around the world, past, present, or future, who has not thought about, I'm not saying thinking about technically, about dying by suicide, but who has never, ever mused and thought about what death by suicide means and how that is part of a normal human life. Everybody, sooner or later, will be thinking about in this way, in a theoretical way, will think about suicide. And they should, because it's part of a normal human life. It's part of the human experience. We cannot pretend, of course, the entertainment industry that makes a lot of money from doing so, they are interested in just making everything fun and pretty and like a sunny meadow that all of us are just walking through, singing and dancing. And if we're not, then we're living wrong. We're doing life wrong, which places a tremendous burden on those who have never felt that way or who simply do not feel that way, that they're walking and dancing through a flowery meadow. But they will not usually confide to others that they don't feel that way, especially to loved ones, because they don't want to worry anyone. And sometimes they will not even confide to themselves, because remember, they're still thinking that because they're feeling this way, they're doing something wrong. So they're training themselves seriously, not just hiding. They're training themselves seriously every day to love life. So
Yeah,
one of the most basic questions I think we should be talking about with our children and in school books is, are we obliged to love life? Do we have to love life? Just because we're here and we're born, does that mean that we actually are forced to enjoy life? Obviously, the question is no. So if we're not forced to love life, but maybe we can experiment and find out how we can possibly love life, that would be a completely different approach. And then we're not giving people the idea that just because it doesn't spontaneously work for them, that there's something wrong with them. So what I'm saying is everybody has sooner or later thought about suicide, not the act of suicide. And So this is no stranger to anyone. And for a being endowed with intelligence and autonomy, such as we are, even religion, Christian religion, for example, makes a big point about that, that God created humans in his likeness and he set them free and gave them choice and autonomy. So, a human being endowed with intelligence and choice will certainly sooner or later come to the point where they can choose whether to end their life or not, which means that this is not an aberration. It's not something that is a stranger to the human experience. And of course, there's a big difference between thinking about it and then acting upon it. But when we go back to basics, which we always have to, we need to get out of the normal narrative and go back to, as you said before, does this sound true? Does this sound foundational, fundamental? Does this sound profound? Does it feel profound? If we keep thinking back to the very origin of what we are thinking about, things become very simple. Not simple to do, but simple to understand. And one of the simplest facts is that of life is that since there is birth, there is also death. And in my outlook on life, we're not in a life and death experience. We're in a birth and death experience within life. You don't have to be a religious person to see it that way. Death is not the end of life. Death is the opposite of birth. But life continues because it always has to, it always has, and it always will. So we are making a big fuss about death already, and then we're making an even bigger fuss about death by suicide.
Yeah. A couple of points that that you brought up, and I have a congenital blood disease that's high risk and life threatening, and I face my mortality every day. And my husband and I actually just had a conversation. And Dr. Kristen, welcome in. I see your comment. We're going to get to that in just a second. I'm going to read that. But he said isn't it strange how we will attach ourselves to partners who become our greatest teachers, because one of his greatest fears is losing the people he loves. And I happen to have a high risk, life threatening blood disorder. And so I face my mortality every day. And he said, you're not afraid of death. I'm more afraid of you dying than you are. And my simple answer was, well, I'm going to. I'm going to. So we have overcomplicated this. And I want to get back to something you said at the beginning of that comment, this forced idea that we have to reach happiness, right? On David O. Harkin's map of consciousness, happiness is up there with pleasure and ecstasy and one of the highest vibrational emotions. Well, that's hard to maintain all the time on a daily basis. So, where in my own practice and when I'm working with people, we like to stay in places of willingness and curiosity. Can I be curious about possibly enjoying this? Am I willing to consider maybe changing this thought? The emotional intelligence skills of willingness and curiosity do not get talked about nearly enough, and they sit at that moderate vibrational level on his map of consciousness, and they're easier to maintain on a more consistent basis. So I think they're really overlooked. And curiosity about uncertainty can be scary for us, and a willingness to stay and see what happens the next day. You know, we have a saying too, rest is needed, but always one more try. So I agree with everything you said wholeheartedly. So here's another question. Many people assume that in these thoughts, people are looking for death. um, it's my thinking that they're just going, wow, I don't want to live this way. And if the case is, I don't want to live this way, then if they can get willing to make some changes, they absolutely do not have to live that way. If they've taken inventory, done the human excavation and decided, wow, I don't like where I'm at. There is always the possibility to change. What do you have to say about that?
Tying into that, just one step backtracking, I sent a meme to my family yesterday, which is attributed to Albert Einstein. I'm not sure if he said that. People do things like that to make their thoughts more powerful, and then they say so and so did said that, and so forth. But I love it because it has to do so much with what I say, that the human race is not exactly known for loving the truth. Like,
Yeah, no,
like,
no.
like
I'm
not
a
at all,
truth teller. I know.
right?
People don't
So,
like the truth.
so those who speak the truth are silenced. Messengers, traditionally in history, who related the truth, if the truth was a bad message, the messenger was killed, just because the recipient was angry and mad, and he had nothing else that he could do but kill the messenger. So, and if we go back hundreds and hundreds of years of cultural behavior and conditioning, is it not any wonder that we are in many cases so living so far from the truth and from the fundamental aspects of what life is actually all about? One thing we are certainly doing is that we are constantly arguing and with life and trying to tell life what it has to be. Before we even took a couple of years to find out what life actually is, we already know what it has to be. And we are totally perverting what is actually happening with our existence. We have entered this sphere for life to take us by the hand and show us all of the things it wants to show us and is able to show us. So we came here for experience. And life doesn't take our hand and say, take my hand, I'm going to make you happy. Maybe life in a moment of super truth would actually say, and by the time I'm done with you, you'll really be happy. Because I'm going to let go of your hand. You go back to where you came from. But the gift of life is not that you've been ever so happy. The gift of life is that now you have a knowledge and an insight and a time-tested and repeated over and over again wisdom that no one can take from you. That is your birthright. That is the gift of God, so to speak, to make you and empower you completely within your, I don't want to say limits, but between your capacity, so that you
Custody.
become in a way, and again, ancient writings say that you become in a way like a god yourself, like a goddess yourself, because now you're not a student anymore. Now you're not a feeble apprentice anymore, but now you have become a master of what you have experienced in life.
Yeah,
And
it doesn't take our hand and say, I'm gonna make you happy. As a matter of fact,
not at
we
all.
we villainize trauma. We are all like, I'm trauma. We're all traumatized. Trauma is part of the human experience. It's what we're gonna go through. Now, of course, listening to each other's stories, some people are going to be, some people's traumas are more shocking than others, but male, female, man, woman alike, we all have trauma.
Yes, trauma is a natural part of life.
Mhm.
Again, it is not something uh, to ask for, because it's going to find you anyway. All of the trauma that life wants you to go through and master is going to find you automatically, like a magnetism.
Yes,
So
yes.
we
It's
don't
gonna
have to
find
look.
you.
We don't have to look for difficult situations. They know when we're ready, and they know when we can have them.
Yeah.
Somebody once asked me a while ago. He had a tough experience because his uncle was kidnapped and returned dead in a box, and the kidnappers wanted a lot of money and so forth. The whole family went through a real bad ordeal. So by the time he finished his story, I just looked into his eyes and said, from my experience, I did not hit him over the head with that, but eventually the message was, from my experience in life, life happened to you, and these things happen to you not to destroy you or to
Mm,
humble and humiliate you and to make you feel how small and insignificant and helpless you are. These things happen to you because somewhere knew that that they can happen to you. And that even though you may feel like you're on the verge of being destroyed, you will not be destroyed. But that's exactly where you start learning so much that you can never learn from a book or from somebody else's story. You have to be there yourself. And life takes no pleasure. I mean, think about it. God would take no pleasure in destroying his creations, but he or she or they continuously let us go to the verge of the abyss because that is where we learn the most. We almost die, but we don't. So
mm.
coming back to this quote by supposedly Albert Einstein, it says, "Knowledge and ego are directly related. The lesser there is knowledge, the less knowledge, the greater the ego."
Yeah.
If we could just live by that, we would realize that individually we are extreme, and for good reasons, for a certain period of time, we are completely egotistic. Everything revolves around us, and period. But the more we learn, the more we know. And the more we know, the more humble we become. And the
Mm.
more humble we become, the more teachable we are. And the more teachable we are, the more we forget about our ego because we actually feel elevated that something or somewhere or life is taking so much pain and time for us. That can be an ego boosting thing, giving us so much importance that we're learning so much, even though it be in a painful way, but we are learning nonetheless. I think it's easy
Yes.
to realize that once we change the narrative from life is here for me to be happy to life is here for me to experience myself and my interaction with the cosmos, we're in a different story.
I think you just hit experience yourself first. And I think so many of us miss out on that because so many of us are busy blaming with our finger pointed outward. That person did that to me, and my parents did that to me. And instead of taking the depriving themselves of the ability to hold themselves accountable for what part they played. Even people pleasing has a manipulative component to it. So, yeah, we all have, and the word narcissistic is overused, we all have those tendencies at times. Let's get to our guest today. Dr. Kristen says, I too have had multiple family members die by suicide, my grandfather, my father, and more. I too challenge the belief that suicidal thoughts mean an individual wants to die. I struggle with suicidal thoughts more days than not, and I've learned to manage the overwhelming feelings associated with the rumination. She has developed a neuroscience based program for those who suffer with it. Small cohort studies suggest that the program leads to significant reduction in the rumination. So anybody can DM her if they would like to learn more. Teddy Ingalls says, we are always in the top tier while truth telling its own immediate perfection. I like that. Truth telling is its own immediate perfection. And welcome in, Caitlin. Caitlin says, I completely agree with you, recognizing that not everybody has to be or will feel happy. Bad things happen to everyone, but being curious and willing to work through it shows true strength. So, Harold, another question I wanted to ask you, and again, it's my belief that we go through these traumas because they leave imprints upon us. But if we let the imprints create the rumination and hopelessness, that's where we start running into some bigger challenges. But for family and friends, and you know my story that I suffered a full mental health psychosis crisis, and my family did not deal with it in ways that helped. So, for the families, for the loved ones of people that are struggling, because even sometimes therapists struggle with knowing how to respond. What helps create some healthy communication? What advice do you have for the loved ones of the people who struggle with these thoughts or rumination? How can they help more or in different ways than we're doing now?
The only thing I know really works, for which I can give a guarantee, other things may be useful, but may not always work for everyone. But the only thing that truly works, and somehow I have always known that from my very earliest childhood days, is communication. Communication means, remember, communion in church, which means the presence and the nearness and the merging with that which is heavenly, with that which is considered God. Communication means the nearness and the merging of what you are saying and what I am saying. And at the beginning of communication, neither one knows, as you've said, sometimes we go into a deep rabbit hole and we may end up with Alice in Wonderland and a really mad hatter and a grinning cat and all of these pipe dream characters. It matters not. Communication is the beginning of an exchange and making something that may be foreign or completely strange to us, to make it ours, to make it more comfortable to live with, to make it more understandable, to make it part of our life. So when we start communicating, we're building common ground and common signposts along the way. You will still go down the path of your life, and I will do the same, but we will not have the impression that we're alone, that certainly we're the only fool. Everybody is much smarter than we are. Uh, we will be encouraged to put away all of those masks that we already started wearing when we were 1 or 2 and 3 years old, because we had 24/7 to figure out what did we have to do in order to get the most attention and to get everything that we needed and wanted,
Yeah.
which is a natural process of survival. It happens everywhere in the animal world. It's also part of why babies are looking so sweet, because they cannot help themselves and need all of the attention that they can possibly get. But that has to slowly wane as we get older, and we need to take more and more responsibility for ourselves, take life's hand, and see what it wants to show us. And I think we can only survive that process of experiencing life if we are willing and industrious, so to speak, in communicating.
Yeah.
Everything else will come on its own and almost naturally by itself. But if we do not open our mouths And I even agree that communication isn't just talking, it's also touch and feeling and cuddling and having a quiet weekend, maybe saying nothing. That's also communication. But by all means, life is not to be lived alone. It is too hard, it is too difficult, it's too dangerous even to live life on your own.
Yeah, I've often said some of the most, two of the most important words you can say to somebody struggling is simply, I'm here. I'm here. Not try to fix them, not try to fix it. And I think a lot of people, because of their own insecurities and their own fear, will go into fixing. Let me fix this. Let me fix this. Let me fix this, instead of just saying, "Okay, I'm here. What do we need to do? Do we need a quiet weekend? Do you need me to hold your hand? What do you need in this moment? I'm here." Or it may just be sitting in silence next to another human, feeling not alone. And I want to speak directly to LinkedIn user. Toxic positivity places obstacles to discussion of topics such as evidence in this stream. My friend, if you will please go back and watch the beginning of this, you'll see where Harold and I both talked about how we do not adhere to the you must be happy toxic positivity, and rather encourage a willingness and curiosity about life. So please, by all means, circle back to this once it gets posted and listen to the first part of it, because I think that will help you tremendously.
I
And
love this comment
yeah.
because it brings up one of my favorite griping points. So good for you, LinkedIn user. I don't even think that there is something like positivity because life cannot be compartmentalized into positivity and negativity. Life doesn't work that way. We do, which is part of why we are so unhappy because we think that positive is whatever pleases us and negative is whatever we don't like. And the truth is, life couldn't care less about what we think is positive or negative. Life is one whole, and we are supposed to experience all of it, not just the parts we like. And toxic positivity ties directly into resilience, which is another abducted and totally misused concept. Because resilience means that we can survive within a certain bandwidth of conditions for quite some time. But it certainly doesn't mean that resilience means that I create really bullshit conditions for people to work in, for example, and then I expect them to be resilient in surviving in these conditions for 40 or 50 years without showing symptoms and eventually being mentally disbalanced and going mad. That
Mm.
is not what resilience is all about. Obviously, there are a lot of forces in this world who would keep everything unchanged just the way it is, and they would like to upgrade the human race. I am known on the internet, even AI knows that I am saying it is the human being that everything has to revolve around. And if we are pushed to our limits in what we can actually deal with, it is not a question of personal failure or resilience. It means there is a systemic problem and we need to change life systemically and not fix individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why the memoir Notes of a Certified Madwoman, the whole point of it was to give an insider's perspective on the psychiatric arena as a psychiatric patient who is institutionalized, because there are a lot of inhumane things that go on in trying to help, and we lose a lot of dignity. We are not looked at as human beings. We are looked at as paperwork and labels.
A
And
commodity.
yes, things, yes, and a moneymaker. Believe me, I've spent a lot of money. They were not cheap places.
One thing I also think is extremely important to understand, and those are the moments where I'm always grateful when other people find the right kind of words that I couldn't even hope to have found, but everybody has their own experience. There is a book in German written by a woman psychologist, and the title I find ever so ingenious. Roughly translated, it means I cannot even want to.
Mm.
Part of my father's tool to try to encourage my mother and to encourage their children, and because he was a very sportsman type person, he basically said, and this is what he grew up with: if you want it hard enough, all you have to do is want it hard enough, and
Mm.
it will work, it will happen. But when you are in a certain state of depression, and I'm not talking about being unhappy and all
Mm.
of these other things that people mistake for being depression. When you're in the depths of depression, where you have lost basically many of your capacities as a human being and more or less just existing like a vegetable, it makes absolutely no sense. In English, you say it makes no sense flogging a dead horse. It makes no sense to approach a person like that and say, uh, all you have to do is motivate yourself a little bit more and work harder and do this and do that, and you'll be fine. That's long gone. That maybe could have happened years before the real damage was done. But once the
Mm.
deep damage, the deep breaking is done, you cannot motivate people in this way. And I'm saying this also for the people who think that this is a good idea to say. Just because we all look like human beings doesn't mean that we're all the same. In
Mm.
our nakedness, in our sameness, we're all very different.
Mm.
And just because every river empties into the sea doesn't mean that the water quality and what all the things that the river heard on its way is the same with every river. Of course, it ends up in the sea and then it's all part of the whole. But every river, as everybody knows who ever looked at water running closely or a lake, every body of water has its very own nature and personality. Even it smells different, it tastes different, it feels different on the skin when you swim in it. So there isn't one suicide, there isn't one depression, there is not one way of being dissatisfied and disappointed with life. And as there are 8 billion people on this planet, there are 8 billion ways to live and find purpose. But finding this purpose is very individual and it's very different for each one of us. I believe that there is purpose, but it's my purpose. And
Yeah.
I cannot share my purpose with you. I mean, I can tell you about it, but I cannot give you a sip out of my bottle and say, now you continue walking through your desert. There
No,
is a
just feel better. Yeah,
there,
just feel better. Yeah.
there's a limit to what we can actually do for each other, and we cannot give each other a motivation and a deep sense of purpose to live.
Yeah. Yeah. We can't fix it, right? We can't be the fixer when it comes to this. We can't. So
And if I was the creator, I wouldn't even want you or me to fix somebody else, because that would be too much interference into their self-learning experience.
mhm, mhm. You know, it's fascinating in my own journey. For the majority of my life, I ran on a very high level of mania, which is very quite productive and it gets a lot done. And when I hit untreated menopause because of my congenital blood disease, I'm not eligible for treatment. I did hit a depression, and it's a strange feeling to want the motivation, to know you need to go do the thing, but absolutely have none of it. It was fascinating to explore that level of menopausal depression because it was a new feeling, experience, state for
And that
me.
is such a big topic too.
Menopausal depression?
I've just been going through
Yeah.
menopause. In fact, our whole family have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the whole family goes through it if somebody goes through it.
Absolutely. No, in a working happy family, you cannot have a dad or a mom who or a child who is seriously suffering, and it's none of the rest of the family's business. We all went through menopause, and we sometimes still do, and we'll be
Yeah.
very happy once it's over.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I also hear that for some women, it is tantamount to dying
Mhm.
because their body goes into such flip flops that really they're losing their mind over it.
Well, and I had just what happened, I had just found stabilization for long periods of time, and then this hit, and because I'm not eligible for any kind of treatment because it will affect my clotting disorder, and I had a male doctor hand me some Valium and say, "Wing it, good luck." I was like, "Thanks for that," but it is a you change on a cellular level, and anybody out there, if you've got a gal ready to go through it, be prepared for them to start setting some really crazy boundaries. Boundaries come down hardcore during this time period. But yes, that level of depression was fascinating and shocking to experience, as motivated as I had been my entire life, for it to hit so hard and so fast and so out of nowhere. And you really do want to get the things done, but there is nothing in your being that's going to get up and get them done when you're
So
in that
this is another
state.
good example of how can we deal with something properly, humanely, intelligently, in an empowering way when we first of all know nothing about it. It's never talked about. We have no experience with it, and we think it's just a woman's thing.
Yeah. Well, you hear about mood swings and hot flashes. You don't hear that there's over 100 symptoms
Yes.
related to it. So, and if there was a symptom, I had it, all of it. So, but again, that level of depression gave me a new understanding of even how I made some errors in trying to support some of my friends or family members that struggled with chronic major depression or chronic MDD, major depressive disorder. So,
My wife,
um,
Margot, she used to work for a very prestigious company visiting pharmacies all over Austria. And she was very well liked, and she was always training people and so forth. One day she came back from a week's traveling out in the country, some of these pharmacies in the boondocks, so to speak. And she related to us that a lovely woman had died in a village, and that it really saddened her because she was such a special human being. And when she inquired about why this woman had died, first of all, initially she wouldn't get any answer. And then one of these women in the village told her in a very sort of slap way, very almost insensitive and unfeeling. Oh, well, she's just been going through that phase, and she killed herself.
mm, mm,
So even though I'm not a woman and I'm not living in a village in the country, when people talk about personal variables in life and personal experiences that go deep emotionally as well as physically in such a way, it reminds me of how possibly we have been talking about menopause, for example, if we ever did, for hundreds of years, going back into the Middle Ages and even earlier, just that time. and oh, she just killed herself.
Mhm.
If that is the level of our understanding, if that is the quality of our dealing with each other as human beings, if that is the energy of passing on knowledge or foolishness to our children, is it any wonder that we're living in the way that we do? And is it any wonder that the most sensitive people are basically leaving this planet the first? And if they don't leave, there is a phenomenon like inner quitting. People do that on jobs all the time. They quit the job, they're still there to receive the paycheck, but they're no longer really participating in the work. And people do that a lot in life, and they have good reasons for doing so. And I'm not saying that they should blame everybody else for how they're being dealt with, but I am saying that it is at least a shared responsibility. How
Yeah.
you feel and how I make you feel.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I had a therapist once tell me, and then this was an interesting question about my second marriage, and she said, "It's not about how you feel about it. It's not about how much you love. It's about how does it make you feel?" And it's worth asking. You know, if you're stuck in something, it's not about how you feel about it, but how does it make you feel? And is that something that you are willing to get curious about changing? And LinkedIn user says that they appreciate your clarification. Thank you. And they intended to distinguish between positivity and toxic positivity, but
Thank you.
acknowledge that these are complex considerations not easily represented in a brief written comment. So thank you, Hera.
Yes.
Thank you.
We
And
are
then,
in complete agreement.
yes, yes. And then Teddy says, when we find the courage to own our lives wholly and completely, suicide thoughts and our actions are irrefutably ours alone. Yes, this will devastate loved ones who can't ultimately know anything about our life and death experiences and journey. And I made a post on LinkedIn the other day, because I see so much about ADHD and neurodivergent and treating them differently. And here was my theory. There is no one normal brain. There is no one normal brain. And you brought up the word variable. And I don't think we make enough room for human variation because we are all completely different in how our experiences have developed us. So
Think
there's
of
not one normal brain.
think of the concept of unification, unifying things, usually for the sake of dealing in an easier way with things. We want to unify them, like yeah, applying cookie cutters on people,
Mhm.
and they come out of the factory in identical shapes, easier packing, and all of that. And diversity. For some people, diversity is a real scare word because it means, I think it means something to their ego in terms of, we'll never be able to control this.
Mhm.
And then the voice from the universe comes and says, right, you are, and you're not supposed to. This,
Exactly.
this is not your mission to control anything.
Mhm.
This is your mission to explore yourself,
Mhm.
allowing as much diversity as life has allowed already.
Yeah.
And life, Mother Earth, knows what she is doing. We don't
Yeah.
need to teach her anything or make her smart. We need to get smart and become part of the action again. Part of humanity's history has become to alienate ourselves from nature and from life as far as we possibly can. We have.
Yeah.
And I think that many today, even if they are not sensitive or spiritual or anything like that, they are sensing that we are at the end of a circle in the outer universe, and it's time for us to come back, to go home.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
go home into a different place, but to come home to how this, don't want to say game, but it's almost like in the Matrix. It follows rules and programming steps, how we can be part of this process again rather than fighting against it.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, going back to that depression, Harold, you have some ideas about what depression communicates to us. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yes, and I'm basically just going back to psychologists who have already talked about this decades ago. I wish I had known it then. That was in the 1980s when a great mind made clear that we are happy, we are blessed, as long as we still have symptoms. Because if we don't have symptoms, we're in a real bad situation. If a truck parks on our leg and we don't feel it, the leg is going to fall off very soon. If we feel it, we at least have a chance to do something about it. So the symptom, depression can be seen as a symptom. It's not really the problem. Even the underlying condition is not a problem. It's just an as is. There is something wrong. Something is not entirely wrong for the rest of the universe, but there's something not in harmony with our existence, with our needs as human beings. Therefore, we feel and develop symptoms. And one of the most general symptoms, we know that from little children, is that we lose joy in what we're doing. It doesn't mean that we go into depression quickly, but we no longer enjoy what we have been doing. We think it makes no sense. We think that we cannot win the game. We think that all of the world is really mean and bad, and we're not ever getting what we really want. And therefore, we go into this circle of beginning depression. And finally, we sit in the corner of a room, don't even watch television anymore, and we feel totally treated wrong by everything that surrounds us. I think that's a simplified way of talking about symptoms of depression. Some people I know are saying that depression is actually a medical condition. I'm not sure it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure it is something that is like a disease,
Mm-hmm.
because you can also have symptoms of depression for a whole lot of various reasons without being ill.
Yeah,
You're not sick,
exactly.
you're just depressed. You're
It's a
not
symptom.
impressed. You're not impressed anymore. You're not joyful and happy anymore. You're depressed.
Yeah. You're not impressed, but you're depressed. I love it. Um, okay, you have spoke to people around the world now at this point. Um, what do you think we're still getting wrong in the mental health arena, in the psychiatric arena, about the way we're supporting people who might be suffering, and how can we change it?
When you have a broken leg and you are walking in a cast or a stick or in a wheelchair, everyone respects that. I mean, it's a real respectable medical condition to have a broken leg. When you have a broken heart,
Mm.
it's probably your fault. Just as it's probably your fault if you have been raped, you probably invited it. So if you have a broken heart, if you have cancer of the soul, it's not like having breast cancer, where people gather around you and do everything that they possibly can, because it's just you and it cannot be seen, and nobody knows where it started and where it's going to end. And maybe you're even making parts of it up and you're acting like a diva. And you know all of these reactions that the world can give you.
I've had many. I've had all of them. I've even
So,
had
so, so
a,
I think that the problem, just to finish that idea, but please go into what you were just about to say, because you're talking from lived experience. Um, the problem is that we really don't know how to deal with it. And rather than saying we don't know, ego jumps in and says, well, I'm an academic. I've studied this for decades. Uh, I've read tons of books, and you're supposed to do this and this and that, and take this medication, and have this talk therapy, and go to this institution. And if you are cooperating, you'll be fine.
you'll feel better. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spent about 200 grand of my corporate dollars doing everything they told me to do to fix my brain. CBT, DBT, neurofeedback, brain mapping, therapy for highly sensitive people, psychotherapy, walk and talk therapy, ART, I did it all. And I was still waking up going, I'm not sure about this. So for me in my journey, it was getting to a place of really understanding myself and liking who I am as a person. Because even in my addiction, I was one running from emotions. Guess what, my friends? They're not so bad once you turn and look at them. They're actually kind of fun to explore. And we spend our whole lives running from them. But the story I was going to tell you is I now have to take my medical record in with me. Anytime I have chest pain, order is go straight to the hospital. Might be another clot because I've had so many. I have to now take my chart in because, in addition to having that, I have psychiatric labels, as they were. And I agree with you. What are they really? But I mean, people can sit down with you for an hour and throw one at you and then say, take this med and you'll feel great. And I still remember this to this day. I was explaining what years I'd had the embolisms, what the circumstances around them were. I was in for chest pain. They'd already done the standard EKG, the X-ray, which doesn't show a clot. I need a CT. But before they ordered the CT, the nurse got down to my psychiatric chart. Her face turned white, Harold, and I could see her change instantly. And it was a look of judgment and it was a look of doubt. And she went and got the doctor. And then they thought that I was not telling the truth about how many embolisms I had had because of my psychiatric history. So now I have to take my medical records with me when I go to the hospital for the chest pain scares. So, yeah, it is very much still stigmatized. It is very much still misunderstood. And I love that you're saying we can have these experiences, we can have these feelings without throwing a label on it, without throwing a diagnosis on it. You know, it is a season, it is an experience, and we are all going to run into it at some point in our lives. I do believe. Yeah. We're all going to run into it, whether it's for ourselves or whether it's with someone else. So Harold, this has been amazing. We're right at an hour right now. Thank you so much for being here. We always ask our guests one question because it is a notes from the edge question. And the question is this: in your life, what did you perform in order to survive? And what did dropping that performance and or mask do for you to change it?
For the longest of times, I said, and that's still partly true, I don't know. I tried to really embrace life in its wholeness, which is something I'd always done unconsciously, maybe to prepare me for the in the first third of my life, to prepare me for the next two thirds.
Mm.
And I've said in an interview that, because I had been asked, how do you wrap your mind around these experiences? And I said, I'm not quite sure, but one thing I know, and that is step by step. I cannot, at least I could not do it in any other way. I, I think that also part of human thinking is, think of making donations for against poverty in Africa. After having made attempts for the past 100 years or so in the Western countries to erase poverty in Africa by pumping a lot of money there and knowledge, people are getting compassion fatigue and they think there's nothing they can do about it. It's never going to change. And just because there's nothing they can do about it, they cannot change everything, they'll do nothing.
Mm.
So just because we cannot erase poverty in Africa, we are not even in a position to donate $1. And how intelligent is that?
Yeah.
So just because I couldn't change my life, especially overnight and all at once, why should I have thought that I couldn't do anything at all? There were lots of things I could do, and lots of things I could do step by step.
Step by step, a day at a time. Yeah.
And one slogan that we put on a coffee mug at the beginning of the year is for people to realize that rest is part of not giving up.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that.
Mm-hmm.
Get yourself a sign or a T-shirt and says,
Mm-hmm.
"Gone fishing."
Yeah. Well, and we have a saying around here that says, rest is needed, always one more try, but rest without guilt. Because we high producers will be laying there, but our minds will be going, I need to, I should be, I do, and it's on that loop. So when you're resting, rest. Let your body rest as
Especially if you
needed.
work from your home office, like I do,
Yes.
because
Yes.
I'm retired.
You need naps. You need naps. All right, let's
You,
make sure we have
you
no
can
more
take a nap.
comments. You
You
need
can take
naps.
you can take half the day off. You can even work in the middle of the night. Every time you start feeling that feeling of exhaustion, honor that. It's a symptom.
Yes. Yes. Without guilt. You got to add the without
Of
guilt.
course,
Do it without
knowing
guilt.
that knowing that if you honor it now, it's like
You avoid the crash. You avoid
putting
the crash.
it's like putting new bullets in your gun.
Yes, you avoid the crash. And LinkedIn user says, thank you both for presenting this discussion. The topics raised are extremely important. It's been very informative and perhaps even transformative. So
We hope so.
wonderful, wonderful news. Well, Harold, we also usually close out with a question of what conversations do you think we need to be having that we aren't? This is the pivotal conversation that we need to be having that we aren't having. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to put all your information on here so people know where to find you. And we were just live across everywhere. And then you'll be famous on all the podcasts too, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have a great day. And my friends, thank you so much. Thank you, Teddy. Thank you, user, for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Kristen, for adding to our discussion today, my friends. And if you are struggling, I'm going to put some resources included here that you can use to reach out to. And remember, one of the most important things I think that were said here today is communication, communion with other humans. And that can literally look like being in separate rooms during the day, but still being there. And I'm going to add that if you're a loved one of somebody who's suffering, one of the most important things you can say is, I'm here, and just be there. Can you be with somebody in their darkness without judgment and without trying to fix it? All right, my friends, this has been Notes from the Edge. As always, we talk about the things we should have been talking about all along. Welcome to the Edge. We'll see you next time.